We have the pleasure of being joined both by Raven Charleston and Justin Waddell. Justin, who is our program director here for Impact Management, and Raven, who is our Enterprise Client Success Manager. So with that, I will pass it to you both to continue the conversation today.
All right. Thank you so much, Ashley. And hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for signing in today. We're really excited about this particular topic. My name is Justin Waddell. I help to lead our impact management solutions here. And these webinars that we do are really designed to help folks in the sector get in touch with best practices that they can begin to implement at their organizations, regardless of where you might be in your technology journey. Now, today we're going to be discussing best practices for implementing and improving better impact measurement processes. And we've got a fantastic guest for that. Raven Charleston, our Enterprise Customer Success Manager, and an absolute pro and expert in this topic is joining us today. And I'm just so excited to talk to her about this. Now, our conversations typically go for about 20 minutes, after which we'll get into Q&A. So as Ashley mentioned, if you have questions as we're going through today's topic and conversation, please drop them into the Q&A and we'll get them at the end. We typically have pretty robust conversations in that Q&A section, so I'm really excited to see what questions you have for us today. But this should be a really great session. And as I mentioned, a session that will hopefully tee up everyone in this virtual room together to really think about how they can take the next step for their organizations with regards to impact measurement and reporting. So without further ado, let's get into it. Raven, very excited to have you here today. I always like to start by introducing the audience to the expert in the room. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background, your role at Bonterra, and what brings you to this work?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I'm really excited to be here today. I first started out working at a nonprofit, so I was placed in a struggling public city school with very limited resources and told to make the most of that, right? I'm someone who has my heart on my sleeve, so I'm kind of a blubber baby in that sense of, do it for the kids. I will do anything for the kids. And in that same vein, it was really important to me to have that conversation, to provide those resources to my students rather than to enter the data accurately or in a timely way. When I stumbled upon Social Solutions, now Bonterra, it was the perfect intersection of the social impact I wanted to do with technology. And I quickly learned the error of my ways and that I really was doing a disservice to the organization I was with, to the students I was serving, and to myself by not accurately measuring all the impact and the efforts of the work I was doing. So I'm with Bonterra as a customer success manager to enable many more organizations to understand the human element of data and why it's so important. So that's what fuels me here at Bonterra.
I love that. So we're going to get into a lot today as far as frameworks and different ways to think about impact reporting and impact measurement. But before we get started with that, let's just ground the conversation in why does this matter? Like, why should the folks on this call today be more interested and passionate about how they might improve impact reporting at their organizations?
Yeah, I think there's a very clear difference between outcomes reporting and impact reporting, right? So impact reporting matters because it shows the real difference a nonprofit is making. So it helps funders and donors see the actual value their support is providing to the organization, and that builds the trust between the two of you. Plus, it gives nonprofits insight into what's actually working, where they can improve, and that can ultimately lead to more funding and stronger partnerships as well.
Okay, that makes sense. And I definitely want to get into that difference between just the outputs and the outcomes a little bit later. But let's start by transitioning to just a discussion of what is an impact report. Can you tell us more about how a nonprofit should be thinking about what an impact report is for their organization, and if there's like a recipe or certain component parts that should go into it?
Yeah, definitely. So an impact report isn't just a summary of what your organization has done. It really ultimately should be a story that highlights your achievements, your challenges, and the journey that you've taken to fulfill your mission. So the first element is having a really clear and strong mission. The key components, it starts with data. That's definitely important, and those numbers matter. But equally important is the narrative around that data. So we think of it as the what, the how, and like the why. What have you accomplished? How did you do it? And why does that matter? So if you imagine you're crafting a story that truly connects with your audience, you want to draw them into the heart of the work you're doing. So it's not just about stating, we served 1,000 meals last year. It's about illustrating how those meals had a direct impact and transformed the lives of those you're serving. If it strengthened the community or met an urgent need that was unexpected for the year. So the power lies in blending the data with the narrative to tell the compelling story of your impact. To be more clear in terms of like the recipe that goes into that, I would say there are 5 key elements. And the first is having clear objectives. Organizations that are new to data collection and are really immature in those processes, the first step is just collecting data. You're going, oh my gosh, this is new. Look at all the questions we can ask. We're getting more intel than we've ever had on those we're serving. But then what, right? What are you doing with that data? You want to have a clear objective. Start with well-defined purpose for your impact reporting, and that will help you ask the right questions of your clients instead of just collecting data for data's sake. The second, of course, is data and metrics. You need to collect the relevant data that your funders and your donors want to see. You want to define key performance indicators and understand what milestones are you trying to achieve in what timeline. The third element is stories and testimonials. So it's not just here's the data we collected, but how is that going back to those you're serving? It can be your clients, it can be your volunteers, your case managers themselves. Like, how are they feeling invested in the work and the services that they're providing or receiving? Next is visual appeal. This is a really big one. You want to complement your data in a very digestible, approachable way. You shouldn't have to spend 10 minutes explaining what the line means or what the metrics are. It should be pretty, like, someone should see it and go, oh wow, that's really made a difference. So that's an important one, and making sure it's fun colors. I'm all about coordinating the colors and making it look good, but of course it's also making sure people can read it and understand it. And the last one would be transparency and credibility. And this is one that I think gets missed a lot of times. If you can check everything, you have the data, it's visually appealing, you're getting it to the right people. If you're not transparent and able to discuss what happened and where areas of growth are coming from and being identified, you're going to miss out on the opportunity to build trust with your donors and with your organization. So that's the recipe I would say you start out with.
Okay, I love that. And I love a good recipe to follow. Like, I think for anyone who's spent some time cooking, you can take this recipe, can build on it, you can make it kind of custom to your organization and how you're working. But just to recap, I think there are 5 key ingredients that you mentioned. 1 is that clear objectives. 2 is clarity on your data and your metrics. 3, stories and testimonials. 4, visual appeal. And then 5, that transparency and credibility. I love all of that. And I really like how you couched it at the very beginning in what's ultimately, I think, a nonprofit really understanding its story of impact. When you talked about the what, the how, and the why, I think that initial clarity on your theory of change as an organization and what goes into it is so foundational for this recipe that you recommend. And I really like that approach of, like, understand your story, understand your theory of change, and then here are the ways that we can kind of bring it into action. Did I recount your approach correctly?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
I love it. All right. Well, let's talk about now some of the implications of this on how you engage with funders. Because I think a lot of this ends up going into reports and memos that you're sharing with funders, both those who are existing and those who you might be taking on. Do you have any advice or guidance on how you can bring this together in a really compelling way for that funder audience?
Yeah, I first want to say that impact reporting is important for everyone involved at the organization. So those who are working there, the clients, but specifically focused on the donors and the funders, you really want, donors want to feel confident that their contributions are making a difference, right? They want to know the input, the output, the outcomes. And to do that, we need to understand what matters most to them. A lot of that's outlined in the grant writing process. So you should have a pretty clear idea of what they're looking for in terms of how you capture that data. And sometimes they're really strict on how you need to present it to them. But once you understand what their priorities are and what kind of change they're passionate about, you can start writing really clear impact reporting and like having those measures. For instance, if you know your funder is interested in education outcomes, emphasize the specific educational impacts your programs have had. So if you present that data in a way that's easy for them to digest, like infographics or standout impact numbers, you pair those with personal stories or testimonials from those directly impacted by those programs. And that will, you're not just sharing data there, you're building a deeper connection and fostering trust. Well, one thing to understand here is that data is more important than securing means of funding. It can reveal the real human aspects of your work. So it allows you to spot gaps and inefficiencies that lead to stronger outcomes and more effective operations, right? Which also donors want to see, not just you're hitting the marks you made last year, you're hitting the goals. How are you expanding those goals? What are you looking to expand or adopt in the future to be more effective? For example, one of my clients, they used data reporting to identify biases in their staff evaluation of students. And it was a breakthrough moment that showed how data can help us become more equitable and more effective in the way we're operating these organizations. And those kinds of little stories gives me chills like every time because they really underscore the deeper purpose of data. It's not only to sustain programs financially, which we know is very important and why I'm sure a lot of you are here today, but it's to continuously improve their quality, the efficacy, and the overall impact that you guys are able to provide. So as we move forward, there are ways that you can present data and the stories that resonate with funders and also transform the way you operate. And to do this, first you want to know your audience, right? Understand their intentions, understand the way they want to process the data you have to offer. You want to balance the data with emotion. I think nonprofits in this space, even like a decade ago, everyone has a really wonderful mission. They have great intentions, and that used to be enough to drive donors and fundraising. Is look at this amazing thing we're trying to accomplish here. In this landscape, this competitive landscape, vying for grants and additional funding and having donors, you really need to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, and show that you're achieving those outcomes. You're saying you're accomplishing what you set out to do, and that their money is going into the appropriate resources to do that, to enable that. Of course, you want to use a results-oriented approach, clear, specific outcomes that might change as conditions change and things move along. And then you want to align with their language. So again, this goes back to if we have any grant writers here today, right? They're very strict. You have to be very calculated in, okay, how do we qualify? And once you get into a really robust system with your data, with your data collection in general, making sure it's quality and clean, you can very easily adapt your impact metrics to be appealing to new grants, new funding. You can be very versatile in that way. And of course, lastly, you want to showcase your return on investment, right? If you have a very clear way of not just saying, oh, you guys helped us this year and we were able to do all this, it was incredible. But if you say, your funding from this program came in and directly impacted the lives of these people, that's a way more compelling statement to make to keep that support and funding. And I'll pause there. I'm loquacious, y'all, so I'll keep talking, but I'm trying to measure it out today.
No, I think that's really great. And I really like the push you offered to make sure that, yes, we are reporting out for funders, but we're also reporting out for ourselves to really improve our operations, to improve how we are serving the stakeholders that we set out to serve, and how we're really, I think, ultimately always getting better at that theory of change. And I think one thing I'd like to offer to the audience is when you're working with funders, don't be afraid to talk about those improvements, to show that you are an organization focused on continuous improvements. When you've got this data and it's got It's giving you light bulb moments for how you can improve your mission and how you can make your stakeholders' lives better and your team's lives better. I think that's really powerful data. And those are really powerful stories that ultimately do feed into that theory of change that we talked about at the top. Raven, does that resonate?
Yeah, I mean, going back to when I was working at a nonprofit and going, yeah, I mean, I can enter the data later, or oh, the data's already messy, what's in there, it's not helpful anyway. If I had my leadership come around and kind of, remove the curtain a little bit and go, hey, y'all, like this isn't just, did you meet your metrics so you get your paycheck at the end of the day? Did this is what we're collecting it for. This is what all of you guys have done, all your efforts so far this year to make this impact. So not only am I going, oh, I'm so glad, like I talked to these students, I gave them what they needed, but oh, wow, here's how I, as an individual contributor, made an impact on the larger mission of the organization. And without that bridge, I just felt like I was drowning in doing data for what, right? And now I understand, but that's part of the conversation we're having here is how do you connect everyone at the organization to be in the ecosystem together, pointed towards the same mission.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. Okay, well, so while we're on the topic of some of that data entry, I want to talk about something that I think is challenging for all of us, and that is distinguishing outputs versus outcomes, and really using, I think, both of those effectively to move forward your mission. Can you talk a little bit about how folks should think about that dividing line and
Mm-hmm.
where and when they each show up to help what you're doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this goes back to what I touched on a little bit earlier of as your organization matures, you want to be more focused on outcomes instead of input. So it's essential to move just beyond reporting outputs, which is we served 100 people in the last month, and focus more on outcomes, which is telling the story of the change. So what difference did your work make? Did you increase literacy rates? Did it improve health outcomes? These are just a few elements that truly like demonstrate the value, the impact of the work you're doing. A great practice there is to use before and after scenarios. If you visualize the change you're creating with comparative data, where the community before your intervention looked like this, where are they now? It's also powerful to use diverse voices in your reporting. So if you bring in different perspectives from the clients, from the staff, volunteers, or even community members, you create a richer, more holistic picture of your impact. So using outcome-oriented language, when you focus on outcomes rather than outputs, you can discuss the change or difference made rather than just the activities completed. For example, instead of stating, we trained 100 teachers last year, you want to show students' literacy rates improved 30% due to teacher training, right? So that's an outcome of your efforts. The output is we trained 100 teachers. Where's the so what? So in these conversations, when you're evaluating the data you're collecting and the story you're trying to tell, when you make that statement, ask yourself, well, so what, right? And if you can push that further, you're getting closer to what you need to be measuring. You also want to highlight long-term impact wherever possible. So I have some organizations that are, I mean, decades old, and they're only now starting to see trends over time because they just didn't collect it in the past, or not in a like easily tangible manipulated way, and in how they can do it with the reporting capabilities they have now. So wherever possible, showcase the sustained or long-term impact of your programs. If you use longitudinal data to demonstrate lasting change and ongoing benefits, that's going to help you in the long run and also bolster you in those moments, in those years where you're really challenged and maybe you don't hit the marks. If you can show that you've had a steady incline, you can explain, oh, this is why it dipped, this is what happened in that year. You can maintain that trust going forward, even when you have an off year. You want to segment your data by audience. This is one, again, that can be challenging for nonprofits that don't have, a really robust data team or data analysts assisting them, because you think, oh, okay, well, we have our one annual report. Here's everything you need to see. There you go. Whew, that was enough work. As you grow and you mature and you develop more resources or deploy more resources to your reporting, you really should be able to manipulate and change the data pretty quickly. Once you have all the data, that's the first step. You need to have it. Then it's how do you break it down and process it in the way that makes sense to each audience member. So your board, your own internal leadership, they have their own directives that they're looking towards in terms of, whatever your 5-year plan, your strategic plan, whatever that looks like, that they're going to be looking for. That data is probably going to be a little different than what your supervisors, your staff on the ground want to see of, oh, what impact have we been making? And then, of course, your funders, like we said earlier, are going to have more strict things that they want to see. So it's not just one and done. You really want to make sure you're tailoring it to the audience. Integrate feedback and testimonials to those reports, especially when we're going back to the holistic picture of your impact. If you have someone saying, this really helped me in these ways. I've done XYZ in the community. I've repeatedly gone to this one food shelter, and that paired with the support from this organization has helped me land a job. Whatever that story is, that really helps, I think, on all sides. And then the last piece, which is really hard to do because we want to show we're here, we're kicking butt, but you want to be honest and reflective. So that dip, you want to say, if there's a dip, acknowledge the dip, and that transparency can help build that trust, and you can move forward from there. But just remember, impact reports are not just about filling obligations; they're opportunities to celebrate your successes and to reflect on your growth, and importantly, engage everyone involved on a deeper level. So that's I'll stop there, Justin, to see if you have any clarifying questions.
Yeah, well, no, there are two things that I want to touch on, but before we do that, I love the framework that you just went through. So I'm going to recap it for the audience one more time. This is essentially like your 5-point checklist when you're going through your impact report to see, like, am I on point with what I should be providing to both my funders, my organization, and my key stakeholders. Again, key parts of the framework. 1, outcome-oriented language. 2, highlight long-term impact. 3, segment your data by audience. 4, integrate feedback and testimonials, really make it real. And then 5, be honest and reflective. If you can hit those 5 points, if you can check the box on those 5 points after you've gone through your impact report, I think that you're going to be in a really strong place with how you're reporting and how you're moving forward. Okay, so all that said, a couple of reflections based on what you just talked about. 1, the so what piece. I love that. Like I would offer, like, when you're putting together a chart, you should ask yourself that when you're looking at it. So what? Like, what is the key point that this chart, this data is communicating? And say it. Really lead with that so what, so that everyone from like frontline staff to your board, when they're looking at your reporting, really understands the key takeaways there. Now, 2, thinking about those outputs versus outcomes. I do want to clarify that some funders are going to have expectations about volume of outputs. And that's just something that, like, you're going to have that conversation and align on expectations with your key stakeholders to make sure that you guys are on the same page with regards to volume of outputs. As long as you're on the same page there, then I think double down on those outcomes. That's where, the rubber really hits the road. And I would say even on those outputs, when you're thinking about volume, there's so many downstream metrics that you can tag into. For example, if you're training teachers, that teacher is having an effect on much more than just a single person, right? Like that teacher might be training or teaching 200 students over the course of a day or a quarter. And there could be, again, knock-on effects throughout the entire community based on that. So there are ways to think about that volume, but I do think that's something that we have to acknowledge, and you just have to get clarity on with your funders. Raven, do you have any thoughts on that? Kind of like that real
Yeah.
element?
Yeah, I'm glad you point out that some funders are gonna be, don't give me the story, give me the numbers. So again, knowing your audience, you need to know if you're just giving them those numbers, or if you can like sneak in a little anecdote. When we're talking about, yeah, volume of efforts that you're measuring, I still think it's, give them those numbers, of course, but I still think it's really important to put it in perspective, because we're only looking at, oh, you're going back to the example, we trained 100 teachers this year. Okay, but that doesn't really tell me. And next year we train 200. That doesn't really tell me if that's effective. If, we need to be training 500 teachers, we fell short. So that's where, it's not just a numbers game. It's, oh, our organization, which has an operating budget half the size of, this other one in our community, we trained 52% more teachers in our facility than they did. No, you're showing, not only those numbers of we trained 200 teachers, whatever, we are excelling with more limited resources with what we're trying to do than maybe our counterparts. So that's where I think the outcomes of volume can be matched and tailored to tell a more compelling story with these comparative data measures.
100%. And again, it goes back to that. So what? Why does that number even matter? I love it. Okay. Well, let's transition to Q&A. Before we do, a couple more questions. First and foremost, next steps. If a nonprofit leader on this call today is feeling motivated by this conversation, what's your recommendation for where they go from here? Like, what kind of information do they need? Who do they talk to? What's like a reasonable timeline if you want to start revving up your impact reporting? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I hope some of you are feeling motivated after today. And if you are, the first step is to just engage your internal stakeholders, your leadership, your program managers, your grant writers, if you're so fortunate to have grant writers at your organization, and you really want to assess your current reporting capabilities. So what's possible? How can you leverage your data resources currently, and how can they be expanded upon? If you have a customer success manager, bring them into the conversation. I, as a customer success manager, speak for all of us. We want to know as much about your organization as you're willing to share with us. And even if it's not something that I can affect change and, get your board to listen to you a little more clearly, understanding those challenges helps me better prepare resources either internally or externally, and best advise you to be successful in those measures and those efforts. Excuse me. If you don't have a customer success manager advocating for you, it's going to be really important to gather information on your existing data, really understand and outline what your key impact metrics are, what your KPIs are, and again, your technology's capability. If you don't have a system that allows you to do reporting, are you using Excel? Do you have someone who understands how to manipulate the data in Excel, Power BI? It's not just about having the fanciest, easiest to use tools. It's what can you use with what you have. So you want to set realistic expectations, and understand that implementing really robust impact measuring or enhancing the reporting you currently have is going to take time. And I know at a lot of nonprofits, y'all are wearing different hats, where you're like, oh, Raven, I came in as a program director. I don't know data very well. So give yourself grace. It will take time. I would say if you have a dedicated team that can really focus on that, 3 to 6 months alone, just really sitting down, looking at those measures, thinking about where do we want the data to go, what data do we have collecting, and it really requires a lot of engagement and ongoing review. Impact reporting is never going to be once and done. You can get really good, it can be really robust, but you're always going to have to tweak it here and there. Your initiatives are going to change. Your programming hopefully will get more robust and expansive. And so that's also going to influence the need to change those reports. I would say, start small with clear goals. And remember to keep checking in with that so what? What is it you're trying to capture? What are you trying to say with the data? And that will help keep you on track.
Yeah, I love that. And, I build on it by offering start small with those clear goals and like, map them to a project. Like we, as we mentioned, like we're being pulled in a ton of different directions. And like we can start with the best of attentions, and then in a week, something big is going to happen and our attention is going to go over there. Like this is not a like one and done situation. This is, as Raven mentioned, essentially 3 to 6 months to really, I think, get the processes in order. So it's worth kind of laying out a framework for where do you want to be on a bi-weekly basis in your journey here. And obviously who's going to be involved, what are the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve. And even just having a soft template for where you want to go for that, a soft roadmap, I think can do wonders for helping people to stay on track and like ultimately keep this top of mind so they can make a difference for the org. Okay.
It's so easy to push it off. It's so easy. I
100%.
have clients where we have those conversations. I'm like, okay, just checking in. They're like, oh, you have reporting deadlines and school starts and program openings and all that. And it's still really important to make time for it.
Yeah. Well, this has been an awesome discussion. Thank you so much. Absolutely love the insights that you brought to the table. We're going to transition to Q&A. Before we do, any last bit of wisdom or guidance that you'd like to impart to nonprofit leaders here today?
I actually have something top of mind because I've identified this with some of my most successful clients. But one trait I've seen, particularly this year, really contribute to the success of my clients is their ability to bring in different parts of their organization. So nonprofits, and I think a lot of organizations in general, really operate in silos. So case managers provide the services, they collect the data, the IT or data teams generate the reports, and then leadership processes reports and sets, the mission, the goals. But the most effective organizations that I work with break down those silos and they foster collaboration across all departments. So I've dubbed it an apricot committee, if you will, for some of my clients, but I'm sure, for similar groups and software, you can name it whatever you need to. But by engaging everyone in the process, each team gets like a much deeper understanding of the other's roles in the organization and what's motivating them in the ways that they are. And that creates stronger advocates, not only for the mission of the organization overall, but for each other, right? So instead of going, oh, case managers are really focused on, well, I need to get this data and this person needs this resource. But if those creating the data collection don't understand that, or they're focused on something else, then we really need to bridge that gap. So if there's someone in the organization that's driving, a committee, or hey, let's have all stakeholders from top down come together and share their perspective, you're going to have a much more efficient ecosystem moving through towards the same goal. Snaps, yes.
All the snaps. That was great. All right. Well, with that, I think we can transition to Q&A, and I will hand off to Ashley.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for such an insightful discussion. I'm sure folks on the call are feeling motivated to kind of better collect their data, tell their story. And I know I am, and I don't have data to collect, but let's go ahead and turn to Q&A. Quickly before we do that, folks on the call, if you are interested in learning more about Apricot, learning more about some of the tools that we have to help assist you all in that data collection and better telling your story, I'm going to launch another quick poll here. Again, feel free to fill that out and we'll have one of our colleagues reach out to you after today's discussion to further that conversation. And feel free to fill that out while we wait for some questions to trickle in. We do have a couple though, so we'll go ahead and get started here, Raven. The first question that we have is from Mia, and Mia asked, what are some key factors that nonprofits should consider when selecting the right visuals or graphics to kind of represent their data effectively in their reports?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a hard one I'm not going to have a set answer for because it's really going to depend on what kind of data you're collecting and what story you want out of it. For example, like bar charts work well for comparisons, while line graphs are great for showing trends over time. You generally want to avoid overwhelming your audience with too much information in a single visual. So for comparisons, keep what you need to in there, but don't throw everything in the kitchen sink into one graphic because you go, oh, they only have a short attention span. I need to give them as much information at once. Stand by your data. And if it means 3 slides, it means 3 slides. And I think the confidence you bring in showing that it will help you in the long run. That's my short answer to that question.
No, but I think that makes perfect sense. Obviously, different visuals for different data and what that needs to look like totally makes sense. Awesome. We have another question from Stephen. Stephen asked, what are some common pitfalls that organizations face when they're trying to implement some like effective impact reporting? And more importantly, also, how can they avoid those pitfalls?
Yeah. One common pitfall is treating data collection and reporting as a one-time task rather than an ongoing process. So some organizations that I work with, they've had this same report for 5 years, but it's not meeting their needs anymore. That's harder 5 years down the line than if they did an annual review of, are we collecting what we need to be collecting? Are we collecting it in the way we need to be collecting it? And sometimes that's a harder question for, now we might need to change our process. And I know all the case managers are used to collecting data in this way, but if that's impeding your ability to report on it, things need to change. And so those changes are easier if there's an annual review or quarterly review and adjustment rather than the painful shift of it 5 years down the line, because now it feels like you're rebuilding the whole thing, which sometimes needs to happen.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think a lot of us can get sidetracked by all the other things that we have going on that you forget to continuously report on that data. So again, that totally makes sense. We have another question here, and this one comes from Megan, who asked, you mentioned the importance of highlighting failures or areas of improvement. And so Megan's asking, how can nonprofits do this while still instilling that trust among their stakeholders?
Yeah. It's really hard to highlight failures or points, areas that need growth. But I think acknowledging those growth opportunities is essential for transparency and accountability. And I think we talk about transparency a lot, but it's hard to truly see that in a really authentic and like gritty way. So if you start by openly discussing the areas where your organization fell short, and using your data to back up those observations, you can meet it with integrity, and demonstrate that you're willing to look at your faults. Now, it's crucial that when you highlight that, you're not just identifying these issues, but you're actively working to improve them. So outline specific actions you're taking or you're going to take in order to address those outcomes. Don't just say, oh, guess that program didn't really work, or, oh, let me, yeah, we had a global pandemic and organizations could have blamed a lot on the pandemic. But if you can say this fell short because of, everything that happened with the pandemic. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna not think about the pandemic right now. But if you can point and show in your data, this is where this change or this happening, this whatever influenced our impact, and this is what the measures we're taking to get ahead of that next time or prepare for other possible situations. That's I think why it's so important to be transparent, notice your flaws, and improve them. If you ignore them, they're going to get bigger, and then you're not going to be prepared to fix them.
Totally. I think we all can relate to kind of ignoring some things and then they kind of grow and become more daunting, right? So definitely better to take a stab at it when you can. Awesome. We have one question from Lana, who asked, some members of our internal team believe that sharing success stories that are like 400 to 1,000 words in their impact reports is no longer necessarily appealing to donors, because they might not want to take the time to read those things. Is that something that they need to be concerned about, sharing like these fully written stories?
Yeah, Lana, thank you. This is a really good one, and I think it goes back to understanding your audience. So there are people that I know they don't want the purple story, the very, my heart's on my sleeve, tell us about the clients. And in those cases, I think it can just be, then maybe you don't tell an anecdotal story, or you have like a summary of the impact that's made in the community, because they can think that just tells me that maybe that donor is a broad thinker. They're thinking like community impact at a larger scale, not, what happened with Cynthia, in the year that you guys serviced and assisted her. I would say that some things that I've seen be successful as well. And this again is dependent on your resources and ability to help have a marketing team or whatever. If they're not going to read the 400,000 words on, an anecdote, make a little video. I've had the privilege to see some of my clients in person, and like I said earlier, I'm a blubber baby, y'all. So I've seen some of these very short 2-minute videos just highlighting a client, the impact. And this was a housing authority. So, someone who was on the streets, has housing, and it's not just that, they have wraparound services. So they have counseling, they have, job readiness and whatever. And just seeing in that 2-minute video the impact this on one person's life, I was crying. I'll do it. I'll do it again. But that, I think, that's them saying, okay, we know people aren't going to read all these wonderful things that we're doing all the time. Let's give them another format to be invested. So that's another alternative. I know there's like production and everything that comes with making a video, but I would say get creative and think about your audience and how you can get that information to them.
Awesome. Thanks, Raven, for your insight. I just have to say, like, your passion and your expertise definitely shines through in this conversation. And I felt it, and I'm sure that others on the call felt it as well. So
Thank you.
yeah, Raven, again, thank you for your time and sharing with us. And thank you all to the audience for joining us this afternoon and learning kind of how to improve your data reporting and ultimately, of course, secure more funding. We appreciate you signing in and definitely hope that you all have learned some things that you can take back into your work. But if you, again, want to learn more about Bonterra and some of our tools, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to have that conversation. But thank you for your time this afternoon, Raven, and everyone joining us this afternoon. We hope to see you at our next session. But with that, we will send you off and wish you all a wonderful rest of your morning and afternoon. Lots of thanks in the chat, Raven, so they definitely appreciate it.
Thanks, y'all.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.
Bye.